Greetings and welcome to Voices Listed podcast, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of those that are often not so much in front of the microphone. Now, that's not the case for my guest today. He's got an interesting background and has almost spent half of his life perhaps in front of the microphone. But I'm interested in hearing a lot more about what he's going to share. In this episode, I'm going to sit down with Yves-Gérard, who is the CC UNESCO, so the Canadian Commission for UNESCO Secretary General. And Yves-Gérard has got such a remarkable CV or resume, if you want to call it that way. He is of Beninese origins, but born in Paris and then grew up in Benin and Togo, and then moved to Quebec City in the late 80s to study political science. Yves-Gérard, welcome to this show.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. It's a real pleasure and an honor, actually, to be here with you and having this conversation.
Awesome. So I look at your resume. You've had such an amazing experience moving between countries and doing a whole lot of things. Would you mind taking us through that journey, the formative part of your life in Paris, I believe?
Yes, it's very interesting because actually my parents are, one of those group of youth, young African who came to Europe in the late 50s, early 60s to study. And so they ended up raising their family in France. So all of us, and I'm the youngest of three, are born in the Paris area. But I moved back home in Benin when I was, I think I was just a few months old. I wasn't even 1 year old when we head back to Benin. So I grew up basically in my grandmother's backyard, playing with, all the animals around and, running across the place. And I was like a little prince growing up back home in Africa. And so we used to travel quite a bit because of my parents' position. And so it was very interesting for us to, move around. So we went from Benin to France, back to Togo, back to France, and this and that, and ended up in Quebec City in 1988. So it's a very interesting journey for me. It is something that I would love to share with my kids, but unfortunately, when you move so much, it's difficult to create some kind of roots. So I ended up having my roots in Canada since I came at a very young age.
Wow, that's so interesting. And so I love you talk about your early years, and I work a lot in child development and early childhood development too. What would you say were your fondest memories of your childhood?
Great. I have been very lucky, to have a childhood where you get to meet different cultures, being introduced to different cultures, learning about and also being exposed actually to history. My parents made it very important for us to learn about history, to learn about Black history, to learn about slavery as well. So we ended up traveling in the Caribbean as well in order to learn about that. In some countries in Africa also, in order to make sure and being very, they really wanted I think they wanted to raise awareness on us about what we were, what we are as Africans, and what we are as the youth, and also, being in contact with different cultures. Because, of course, I'm born in France, grew up in Africa, and then in Europe as well. So I'm some kind of a cultural mix in a way, and being the son of a diaspora. So it's very interesting to see that. And I believe my parents really wanted us to learn about this. So it is something that I value a lot and that I want to carry with me, especially with my own sons who are born here in Canada, Mom is from Haiti, so they really have to
Wow.
carry that with them as
Yeah.
well. So it's very interesting.
Just again, so what an interesting set of experiences, moving between these countries, between cultures, between, different communities. And in so many ways I can kind of relate to that, right? So I grew up in Zimbabwe, in Harare, Zimbabwe, but I had an interesting, growth experience too, right? So my father, my late father worked for a white family, and so I essentially grew up with, white brothers and sisters, and many years later would move permanently to settle in Canada and be in this sort of, context where I experienced race and racism and all of these things, right? Yet growing up, I was taken as family, right? And so having these, very, very interesting experiences, and now trying to navigate that for my own children. But I get too ahead of myself. I know we're gonna, speak about some of these experiences. And so for you come to Canada, you learn political science, and then what was that where you were leaning in terms of going into politics?
Yes, actually, right after university, I ended up
Mm-hmm.
working with for what is now called Global Affairs Canada. At the time, it
Mm-hmm.
used to be the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Canada
Yep.
as a junior
Mm-hmm.
policy analyst. And
Okay.
so I have to be very frank, I hated my job. Really hated my job so much that
Really?
yes, I quit after a few months, actually.
Oh
And
my.
yes, I really hated that. I was one of those youth who has great ambition for the world, wanted to
Uh-huh.
save and wanted to believe that we as humans had
Mm-hmm.
very, very and engaging and empathic relations
Sure.
between among each other. But
Yep.
unfortunately, when you work on policy, you ended up
Mm.
learning very quickly that there are a lot of elements that you have to take into consideration. So
Oh.
I learned it the hard way. So then I
Oh.
scaled back a bit and decided to do
Uh-huh.
something else with my life. So what happened is that I went back to Montreal. And
Mm-hmm.
the funny thing is, you may not see it, but I'm kind of a what they call a tall and husky man. So I'm more than
Yes,
6
yes,
feet
yes.
tall, and
Yep, yeah.
so I ended up going back to Montreal and having that
Uh-huh.
career, working in nightclubs as a bouncer.
Oh wow. Okay,
Yeah,
as a
so
bouncer. I
exactly.
I wouldn't have known that. Okay.
Yes, that's what I used to do when I was a student at the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I went back
Mm-hmm.
to Montreal, went back to that, and one day a friend of mine said, "Well, I have that radio show that I do on a community radio.
Yeah.
So why don't you come and do that? You have a great voice. What? Come along with me."
Yeah.
So I went there and started doing radio just for fun,
Uh-huh.
and
Wow.
it was just fun at the beginning.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
when I was a student at university, I used to write also for the newspaper. So
Okay. Okay.
what ended up happening is that I started doing a radio show
Mm.
on news, and
Oh wow.
talking about Africa, talking about the
Yep.
growth. We were in the mid '90s where there was a
Mm-hmm.
big Pan Africanism movement happening as well,
Okay.
and
Yep.
born, the organization of the
Mm.
African
Union.
countries were
Yeah.
changing.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
ended up. Doing radio, starting as a
Uh-huh.
hobby, and then got
Wow.
hired at CBC after a while, and then
Wow.
did private
Interesting.
radio as well. So that's
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
everything started, and I ended up
Yeah.
becoming a journalist at the time,
Yeah.
hosting morning shows at CBC for several years.
Wow. I
Actually,
mean, it it sounds like it should be the other way around, right? I'm, how do I even get an opportunity to interview such a, a well versatile and well experienced journalist? And so I wanna pick a little bit on your background with the foreign service or with the foreign ministry or with international relations.
Mhm,
And you mentioned a little bit of the discomfort there, right? That
mhm.
you're trying to come in with this perspective of, hey, let's work together, let's co-create, and let's build. Is it in a way that you got into a straight jacket of some sort that you couldn't navigate with your own principles and things that you wanted to? Tell me more a little bit
Ex-
about that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Public service is I'm a public servant myself, and I
Yeah.
love what I do.
Sure.
But
Mm-hmm.
maybe I wasn't mature enough at the time to fully
Okay.
understand the scope
Sure.
of public service. I wanted to
Mm.
do something that was very engaging and be more like an activist. But I
Yeah.
didn't have the understanding at the time that there is some political pressure also,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
also some kind of political alignment that come with
Mm.
this kind of position, that you also have
Okay.
to follow up and protect the influence of the own country. So I didn't understand that at the time. Now that I'm, well, 50 years old, it's obvious to
Yeah.
me now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
when you start your career, you believe that, well, you can change the world, you can make it
Yes.
a better place for everybody. Yeah, yes, indeed.
Mm.
Empathy is there, but
Yeah.
also there are also the interests of the country, economic
Sure.
interest,
Mm-hmm.
strategic interest also that you have to take
Sure.
into consideration. And at the
Yes.
time, I wasn't ready for that. For me, it was too much.
Okay.
This was
Okay.
an infringement for me as a young
Yeah.
man, believing
Yeah.
that he could make the world a better place. Because, of course,
Mm.
at 22, 23 years old, you know better
Youthful
than
zeal.
anybody else.
True, true, true. Right, you're coming with this youthful zeal, and so I do have quite a lot of young listeners as well that are trying to, think about their careers. And so, when
Yes.
you look back to your 22-year-old self, what
Mhm.
would you tell yourself today?
Just be patient. Be
Mm.
patient and learn that actually don't try to go too fast.
Okay.
Things will happen,
Mm-hmm.
but things will happen much more slower than you expect. And you need to understand that the world
Wow.
doesn't have the speed that you want it to have. A friend of mine told me, give me one of
Mm.
the best advice ever, and it was
Mm.
just a few months before my first son was born, and he
Uh-huh.
told me, he gave me the best advice ever, and it is something that
Wow.
I very value a lot now. And
Mm-hmm.
he told me, you know what, the child has his own pace,
Wow.
and you just have to be there for him and just
Mm.
follow that step and be
Yeah.
there to help him. And it's
Wow.
exactly the same thing for the world. Actually, we
Mm.
are being,
Mm.
especially as a young black man, as a
Yeah.
young black African, I was very
Yeah.
impatient to see Africa moving forward. I was very
Mm.
impatient to see, topics such as inclusion,
Yeah.
the fight against anti-racism here,
Yes.
the fight against racism here in
Mm.
Canada. I was very
Mm.
impatient for that.
Mm.
And I can
Mm.
totally understand why we are impatient.
Wow.
It is totally normal. But we
Yeah.
also have to understand that it is a new trend, and it's something that
Mm.
is new, and it's unfortunate.
Mm.
It will take
Mm.
time. Changing
Wow.
mindset takes time. Educating
Wow.
population takes time.
Takes
Because
time.
otherwise we will force people into doing something that they don't truly believe, that they're not
Wow.
aligned with. So they will
Mm.
do some kind of cosmetic changes,
Yes. Yep.
but the deep values are not changing at the end of the day.
Wow.
So that's the reason
Wow.
why we have to carry all those changes
Yeah.
very slowly and very cautiously in order to make sure that, well, and racism will be tackled in this country.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed, but it will
Yeah.
take time. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, somebody like myself at 15 years
Yeah.
old,
Yeah.
I will not see some of the changes that I'm trying to implement myself right now.
Oof.
The
That's
next
heavy. That's
generation
heavy.
will.
Let's pause a bit.
Yes.
Let's pause a bit. That's heavy. And so I'm not 50 yet. I'm 10 years before I get 50, and so I've got a big 40th celebration coming up in a couple of weeks. But what you say about patience, perhaps you're not even speaking more to the 20-year-old, but you're also speaking to me and speaking to
Exactly.
my generation, because
Yes.
I'm a millennial, and my generation has been a microwave generation. We
Mhm.
want it fast, we want it now, and it should happen. We want to
Yes.
agitate, we want to go to the streets, we want it to happen now, right? And so to hear you now and give us these reflections to say, hey, understand that it takes time, understand that you got to be patient, is so important, not only for me but also for my listeners here too, and for my younger listeners too, or those that are millennials, to really, focus on what they're good at, focus on their skills, focus on
Mhm.
developing their skills and ensuring that they're able to move forward. In fact, you remind me of a conversation, and I always make reference to this conversation. Back in 2016, I traveled to Selma, Montgomery, in Alabama, in the US, just to trace the civil rights movement, right?
Mhm.
So I was so interested in learning and appreciating what the journey that Dr. Martin Luther King had walked through, along with the civil rights leaders. And I was fortunate enough to meet with a senator then, who was called Senator Hank Sanders, and he was, proud black man who sat with us and was gracious with his time, and he sort of took us through the journey, of the march from Selma to Montgomery, and he said to us, he said, "Young man." And there were two of us, and we were civil rights sort of activists back at the time. And he says to us, "Look, one thing that I would give you advice, which is very similar to what you're saying, is pick one struggle for your generation and run with that struggle."
Exactly. Yes.
So it's funny that almost 8 years later, to that day, I hear from you the same narrative to say, be patient.
Mhm.
That
Yes,
mhm.
we have to be patient. The reason why,
Wow.
and sometimes myself, trust me, I'm very, very impatient. I have
Mm.
faced uh, racism and discrimination all my life, and I still
Oh
do
my word.
face that discrimination and racism as
Mm.
well. And
Mm.
that to be said on a daily basis. It happens to me.
Wow.
But the reality
Yeah.
is this: in order to
Yeah.
make the real systemic change that
Mm.
all of us would love to see in this society, we
Mm.
have to make sure that it is not only discrimination and racism is not only something that should be carried by
Yeah.
communities who are victim of that discrimination and racism, because
Okay.
otherwise you will be fighting for your own
Mm.
rights. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the fight against racism and discrimination should be the fight of all human beings.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
That's
it will not work.
all.
So, in order
Wow.
to change that mindset, because
Yeah.
unfortunately, the narrative, the common narrative
Mm.
that we have, is a
Mm.
Western narrative, which
Yeah.
basically dictates some kind of
Mm.
norms to all of us.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
we unfortunately do identify with those norms, and it has been
Yeah.
the case for generations now.
Mm.
So we need to
Mm.
make changes slowly in the
Sure.
mindset of that
Okay.
majority or
Yeah.
of that society who has been,
Mm.
you know, um, who has been who had those privileges for
Yes.
so many generations now. So the
Mm.
change in the mindset needs to come among that population.
Okay. Yeah.
Black people, people from diverse
Mm.
background, what we
Yeah.
call now diverse background.
Yeah. Mm.
And it's very funny to say that we are diverse background. We are just
Diverse
human
travelers.
beings,
Yeah.
basically.
We
So
are indeed. Indeed.
we know exactly how it feels to be
Mm.
discriminated. We know that
Yes.
we want that systemic change.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when it happened in the classroom and everybody is 8 years
Mm.
old, and one
Yeah.
kid is being discriminated against by a
Yeah.
teacher, for example, and
Mm.
unfortunately, the other kids, and trust me, at eight
Yeah.
years old, they know,
Yeah.
they can see that their classmate is being
Yeah.
discriminated against,
Yeah.
but they don't have the tools to manifest
Mm.
their
That's true.
that they're against that there is
Yeah.
some wrongdoing, because the teacher
Yes.
is turning around and giving you privilege. So
Yeah.
this is the reality that we are facing
Yeah.
right now
Yeah.
in Western societies and in all societies, I should say,
Yeah.
and because privilege has been so embedded into the
Wow.
mindset of
Mm.
the white majority that
Yeah.
unfortunately it will take a
Mm.
while. So
So is there hope? Is there hope then for
there is
humanity?
hope. There is hope because right now,
Okay.
and I know, Patrick, that you have young children. If you turn
Yes.
to them and you see their
Mm.
friends, the way they play together,
Yeah.
the way they interact
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
there is hope. There is
Okay.
hope because now
Mm-hmm.
you can see that, sorry, the next
Yeah.
generation that is coming up, is aware, is
Okay.
aware of what is happening when you are being diverse, what
Mm.
is aware of the reality and also
Yeah.
the cost of racism
Mm.
on society
Mm.
and
Yeah.
all the tension, the social tension
Mm.
that it creates, um,
Mhm.
the how it's difficult to keep peace among
Yeah.
ourselves when
Yeah.
we have people who are being racist, who discriminate the others,
Yeah.
and so and so.
Yeah.
So there is hope, and I truly believe
Yeah.
that there is hope.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for giving me hope as well. And so one of the things I was reflecting on as I was, doing my research on your work and on your career over the past, couple of decades is this rise, that you had in different positions, right? So you moved, you really embody this sort of, um, inspirational rise within the workplace, right? And so now you're serving as the Secretary General for the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. When I think of racism and race, I suppose maybe because it's a power thing, now you sit there with power, right? As the SG, as the Secretary General. Has that changed? Do you feel less effects of racism now because you also now command a huge sphere of influence? Does that change with the rise in leadership?
No, absolutely not. And actually, and I'll be very frank to
Oh,
you,
mm,
it can be worse at a point.
oh. Okay.
And I'll be very frank here.
Yeah.
We have seen
Mm,
in history and even in recent history
mm,
many Black people who rise to certain positions.
yeah.
And, that path to get there is very difficult.
Yes.
But the reality is this, is as soon as you get into those um, positions, you
Mm-hmm.
can become a target. You will become a
Oh.
target. And you
Oh.
also have to be prepared for that. You also have to
Mm,
be prepared to be facing discrimination among,
mm.
some people who are very close to you as well
Wow. Yep.
on a daily basis. So you have to
Wow.
be very, very tough on that and
Wow.
very prepared and know that,
Yeah.
well, with everything that I've been through in my life,
Mm-hmm.
trust me, there is nothing that can bring me down. The
Wow.
only way I'm
Wow.
going is up.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will never
Yeah.
come down. The only way
Wow.
I'm going is up, and I will be
Mm,
carrying everybody up with me. That's the
that's
goal,
amazing.
actually. And we need
Mm.
to be prepared for that because as long as
Yeah.
there is some kind of rise in your career,
Yes.
you will
Yeah.
become a target. You will
Wow.
become a target because now you are disturbing some kind of system that has been,
Yes.
which is the
Mm-hmm.
share of privilege. And now you're
Yeah.
taking privilege for somebody else. So
Yeah.
trust me, you will be a target. We have seen that
Wow.
in
That's
Canada.
that's
We have
so
seen that
amazing.
many times.
Mm.
Politicians, black politicians being
Yeah.
targeted, black
That's true.
leaders being targeted as
That's true.
well. And
Yeah.
so,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very difficult
Yeah.
for those black leaders who ended up in very high positions. We have
Yep.
seen that in Toronto with the chief of
Yep.
police at one point.
Yep.
We have seen that in Ottawa as well with
Yep.
another chief of police also.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah. Yeah,
it
and
is
we've seen it here in BC, in Vancouver,
exactly,
right?
yes,
Former Justice Romilly, Supreme Court Justice Romilly was arrested
exactly,
for doing nothing.
yes.
Literally black. I mean, wow.
So it's part of the reality, and
Yeah.
we have to be prepared for that. And to the young
Mm,
listeners who are listening to this podcast,
yeah.
it is part of a journey that they need
Okay.
to understand right away. They will
Mm-hmm.
rise during their
Yeah.
careers,
Yeah.
but with that rise will come challenges as well that they
Sure.
will be facing. But they
Mm,
have to be prepared. Don't
yeah.
take it. You have to be politically savvy,
Okay.
uh, very, very much aware of
Mm-hmm.
your environment and your
Yeah.
surroundings,
Mm-hmm.
and because people will be targeting you.
Will be targeting
That's
you.
for sure.
Wow.
That's unfortunate, but
Wow,
it is a
that's really
reality.
unfortunate, and that's yeah, it's true. That's the reality, right? And so I wanna pivot a little bit from this hard conversation. So if you could have dinner with three people, alive or dead, who would they be and why?
Kwame Nkrumah will be sitting on my right. He's an
Oh,
amazing man. Uh, I
yeah.
have um, I have loved Kwame Nkrumah
Uh-huh.
since I was very young, since I was
Wow.
have read a lot about him, his journey
Sure.
as a
Yep.
student in the
Mm.
US, in the UK,
Yes.
and also the work
Yeah.
that he has done for Ghana, but also for Africa in
For
general.
Africa, yes. Mm-hmm.
I will be also inviting Ernesto Che Guevara on my table, of course,
Uh,
to have
yeah.
conversation about
Yes.
his amazing journey and his
Mm-hmm.
engagement
It's
to
amazing.
civil rights and also the
Yep.
liberation of countries as well,
Yes.
of imperialism. And
Yep.
of course, I will be inviting the magnificent Miriam Makeba also about
Aha.
the
Pata
reason
pata, eh?
exactly the reason
Yeah.
why is not only
Mm.
the artistic career that she had,
Sure.
but
Mm.
I believe it's also the activist that she has been as well.
Wow.
And I believe
Yeah.
Miriam Makeba, many people don't really know how important she was when
That's
she
true.
first started and how she left
Yeah.
South Africa because of
Yep.
her activism uh,
Activism.
for
Yeah.
uh, for civil
Against
rights.
apartheid. Yep.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
yes, against
Yep.
apartheid. So these will
Mm.
be the three people that I will invite to my table to
Wow.
sit
Wow.
and have conversation with. Of course, I would love to invite some of our ancestors, my own
Sure.
ancestors, but unfortunately,
Yep.
I
Yeah.
will invite those three
Oh,
definitely
wow, wow.
to have
So it's
conversation.
interesting, right? So you read a lot and they say, well, show me your 5 friends and I'll show you your future. And so you've just shown me the 3 people you'd want. And this activism in you is very, very clear, right? That you are such a social justice
Yes.
activist. And thank you for sharing that. And so let's speak a little bit about your work with CC UNESCO. You're the new Secretary General now as of last year when you were appointed. What have been your priorities? What have you been working on, so that we can, sort of have insights into the work that you've been leading?
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. I think the Canadian Commission for UNESCO is a very interesting organization because, as you
Okay.
know, we are linked between it's an ecosystem of three different parties. So basically,
Okay.
you have UNESCO as an
Mm-hmm.
entity, UN entity
Mm-hmm.
based in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
with all those programs, all those sectors whose mandate
Yep.
is to build peace among civil societies across the globe,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to raise peace in humans' minds as well. And then
Yep.
you also have in that ecosystem the Canadian government as well, whose
Yes.
Canada is one of the first countries to be who co-created UNESCO in 1947 at the time,
Oh, okay.
and so it's very interesting to have that, and
Yeah.
of course the Canadian civil society. So
Okay.
CCUNESCO, the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, is linked between those
Mm-hmm.
three parties in that
Okay.
ecosystem. So one of the
Okay.
main one of the main focus that I have as a Secretary
Mm-hmm.
General is to make sure that we carry very loudly the voice of the Canadian civil society, um,
Okay.
especially marginalized communities such as
Sure.
indigenous communities, Black
Mm.
communities as well,
Mm-hmm.
all diverse communities in this country as
Okay.
well,
Yep.
Asian Canadians as
Mm-hmm.
well. And we need to carry the voices of those communities to the
Okay.
Canadian government, but also to
Mm-hmm.
UNESCO as well. So one of the main focus that we have had during the past year is to focus on how can we influence more, first of all,
Yeah.
and carry the work of the Canadian civil society and especially Canadian experts towards
Okay.
UNESCO, first of all,
Yeah.
and also
Mm-hmm.
to the Canadian government as well. So
Yeah.
it can be aware of the amazing work that is being done here, and of course
Mm-hmm.
that we can convey that work that is being done from the Canadian civil societies in all the
Yep.
14 networks that we have all
Yep.
across the countries to
Wow.
the the international stage with UNESCO. So pushing
Wow.
Canadian experts to be
Mm.
very visible globally
Yep.
and sharing the
Mm-hmm.
amazing work that they have been doing. As you know, there are some amazing researchers and professors,
Yeah.
and some of
Yeah.
them that you do work with, Patrick,
Yes, that I've worked with.
and who have done some significant work that we
Yeah.
actually value a lot and that we promote on the global stage as
Mm.
well. So I believe
Mm.
my dog just came and say hi. So this is Ziggy. I'm sorry.
Hey,
Ziggy wanted to
nice.
be
That's all
part of
right.
the show.
That's part of the yep, yep. Oh, anytime. Welcome, 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 welcome. So now it's and I think of your resume and I think of the journey that you've taken in life. Do you now see this as fortuitous, where you are now shaping policy in so many ways, right? That you're working with civil society organizations, but you're also directly working with the federal government in so many respects, right? In terms of representing. And you started off by saying, well, you wanted, you started off as a junior policy analyst within the Ministry of International. How do you see your role now based on where you started? I mean, this is incredible.
Yes, one of the things that is very important in life is how can
Yeah.
you influence others in order to,
Yes.
first of all, raise awareness towards
Hmm.
by the points that you're making, and
Yeah.
also making sure that they can also convey that message that you have. So
Yeah.
basically, it's very interesting because I was a junior policy analyst,
Yeah.
hated it. But now what I'm doing is instead of drafting those briefing notes, is
Yeah.
carrying that message to
Wow.
leaders within the federal government and at
Yeah.
the global
Hmm.
stage, and saying, well,
Yeah.
this is where we should be going, and this is how we should
Wow.
be doing it. So
Yeah.
basically, I'm doing the same job,
Yeah.
but at a totally different level.
But it's taken you a 30 year
Exactly.
period of getting the experience and the knowledge and the know-how in terms of how you can then speak at a global level, right?
Yes,
So
and
it's
and
it's wow.
and Patrick, if we come back
Yeah.
to where we were saying and
Yeah.
talking about youth that are watching this
Yes.
podcast, is
Mm.
basically you have a dream at the beginning of your career.
Yeah.
Keep on going that track. You may take
Yeah.
different routes, but you
Wow.
will
Yep.
get to the same exactly. You will get to your
Wow.
end goal. So set
Wow.
yourself a goal.
Hmm.
There may be different routes. I even
Yeah.
went back to school,
Yes, you did. Yeah.
myself several
Yeah.
times. I went to Osgood
Yeah.
Hall during that period of time.
Yes.
I did a master
Hmm.
degree in public administration because I
Yep.
needed
Yep.
to get the tools to achieve my own goals,
Wow.
which is,
Wow.
well, how can I influence more and have the
Yeah.
better tool to influence in order to
Yep.
influence on social justice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
which is exactly what we are doing now with the
Sure.
Canadian
Yeah.
Commission for UNESCO. This is our
Yeah.
main mandate, and this is our priority. So we
Hmm.
prioritize, for instance, the we have been very active with the decade of people of African descent, with the decade
Yep.
of the safeguarding of indigenous languages as well. Also
Yep.
very active on the decade of oceans as well, which
Hmm.
has been declared by the UN. So we
Yeah.
ended up finding different tools in order to attain our goals, which is
Sure.
basically promote social cohesion and social justice among the Canadian civil society.
Wow. And how has that been working? So you mentioned that you've got various programs, and the last time you and I spoke, you were very, very passionate and still are about, working with schools and ensuring that the young people are speaking into climate and climate justice issues, are speaking into these social justice issues. How are those programs being implemented across Canada?
We've been doing very well because we have amazing
Okay.
partners. So what we do
Hmm.
basically is that we pair up with organization on the base inside the civil society, Canadian civil society, in order to
Okay.
raise, first of all, awareness,
Hmm.
so they can carry the mandate of UNESCO as well
Yeah.
among their members also, and
Yeah.
supporting them into having projects who are very close and tied to the mandate of UNESCO. So that
Okay.
is part of this is how we promote our work, and
Yeah.
we can also carry recommendation made by our network. So
Hmm.
for instance, at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, we have 14 networks. Some of them
Wow.
those are very broad. So we have
Okay.
the coalition of inclusive municipalities, which
All
is
right.
actually the biggest coalition across the
Oh,
globe
really?
because we have 120 municipalities who sign up
Oh,
to that
wow.
coalition. We
That's huge.
also have the Youth Advisory Group, which is
Okay.
a group of youth aged from 18 to 35, who
Okay.
also are very, very active and very dedicated into different sectors of activities of
Mm.
UNESCO,
Mm.
such as
Mm.
education, culture,
Mm. Mm.
sustainable development as well. We also
Yeah.
have a network of UNESCO chairs as well. Very,
Yes.
very important network that
Yeah.
that has been doing a
A
huge
lot
work
of
globally.
research and a lot of global
Exactly.
impact work. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the network that is very, very important for me, and that's the one that we talked about last time,
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
network of UNESCO schools. We
Yes.
have more than 100 UNESCO schools across the
Wow.
countries,
Wow.
across these countries. So
Yeah.
that network is very, very important because carrying
Mm-hmm.
out the values of UNESCO inside the school system
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, is help us, first of all, to promote the mandate to youth,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
also create young leaders of tomorrow
Yeah.
that will be carrying out the
Yeah.
mandate of UNESCO. So it's very interesting because we have
Wow.
members of our youth advisory group, for
Yeah.
instance,
Yeah.
who were in those UNESCO schools, ended up at the youth advisory group when they turned 18,
Oh.
and then
Yeah.
ended up becoming members of civil societies
Yeah.
organization
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes even members of our youth advisory group,
Wow.
not executive committee, and
So it's
sometimes
almost like it's a pathway, right, for
exactly.
their career development and wow.
Exactly. And
Okay.
so that's
Okay.
something we need to create that.
Mm-hmm.
So our youth is, first of all, aware of the
Yep.
mandate of UNESCO,
Yep.
very tight and very engaged to the mandate
Yep.
of UNESCO,
Mm-hmm.
because I strongly believe that the mandate that carries UNESCO is very tied to the Canadian values. That's the
Yes. Yeah.
reason why Canada was part of the countries who created UNESCO
Yeah.
right from the beginning. And
Right from
it's
the
very
beginning. Yeah.
interesting to see how we were one of the first country actually to establish its own national commission in 1957.
Wow.
And so
Mm-hmm.
our commission has been there since then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's now the organization is older than myself
Yeah.
and has been doing
Yeah.
some amazing work since then. And we need to continue that. And we need
Sure.
to engage more communities into the action
Mm.
that we're doing globally.
That's amazing work that you've been doing, and I certainly have been engaged in various ways, particularly with the UNESCO chairs as well, in the work that you're doing and trying to advance, not only the national impact here in Canada, but also the global impact.
Mhm.
And again, it's just so fortuitous, right? So interesting and so timely that you are now in this position of not only national impact but global impact, where you started off as a junior policy analyst in the
Mhm.
Ministry of Foreign Affairs as it was then. Now you are sitting as the Secretary General of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. Yves-Gérard, thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us today. I'm aware that you've got some commitments and obligations as well. But three things that I've picked from our conversation and that I'll share with our listeners, right? The first one was be patient with your journey. Really be patient with your journey and allow the time that it takes for you to, fully establish yourself and fully develop. The second one is staying the course, right? That it
Okay.
might be difficult, that, you might, get distractions and other things that come your way, but stay the course, right? Sometimes you might deviate and do journalism a little bit or be a bouncer, right, at the nightclub, but the ultimate goal is to have a global impact, and this is where you are. And then find a cause that you believe in and fight for it, and you're so passionate about racial justice, social justice, as well as, we've spent so many hours talking about climate justice and these changing times that we are in. Thank you so much for that perspective. Any concluding remarks you have for our listeners today?
I would love to see more youth being engaged with UNESCO, of course, and of course
Oh,
with the Canadian
fantastic.
Commission for UNESCO. So
Hmm.
our doors are open to everybody to have
Awesome.
conversation and to get engaged into our mandates. And also, thank you very much, Patrick, for having me. It's been such a pleasure having this conversation with you. I think we can go on and on and on, but
Yes. Yeah.
I will be more than happy to do this again in the future. So thank you very much for
Oh,
the opportunity.
thank you very much. And so, if people are to get in touch with this UNESCO, the youth, and they want to get engaged, how best do they do that? Do they go to the website?
Exactly. ccunesco.ca. There is a link there. You
Okay.
can also send us an email. The address is there,
Yep.
ccunesco@ccunesco.com, if I recall, .ca, sorry.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
please send us an email. It will be great to have you and have conversation and maybe learn more about the Canadian Commission for UNESCO.
Yes, fantastic. That was Yves-Gérard, the Secretary General of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. Thank you for listening to the Voices Less Said podcast, and we hope you'll join again next time with our next episode and our next guest. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Voices Less Said podcast with Dr. P. Mac. I hope you enjoyed insights that came out of this conversation. Keep your notifications on. Our next episode will be dropping soon. Thank you and enjoy.